You and I, and I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast, can remember a story that we were told when we were children. We have forgotten the information in an article that we read last week. We've forgotten the information in an article that we read this morning. It just doesn't last. The brain is an attention machine, right? All it does is figure out what to pay attention to. Stuff that comes in a story is much more attractive to the brain. It sticks.
Welcome to the Tyler Dickerhoof Show with me, your host, Tyler Dickerhoof. On today's episode, I'm joined by Frank Spring. Frank is a founding partner at Altum Insights and Undaunted Ventures. Altum is a research firm dedicated to understanding the deep narratives that drive people's attitudes, values, and behaviors. And as well, Undaunted Ventures helps people tell their stories. Now, that may be short, but man, there's so much to it. Frank, thanks for being here with me.
Tyler, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Man, so in this, kind of get ready, a couple minutes, we're just after the top of the hour where we're starting recording. And there was something that I shared with you as we were adjusting your camera, right? And it's this mirrored effect. And I said, hey, Frank, I would explain to you, but man, I want to save it and record it. And I had this experience, and I'm going to share it with you in real life, and we can then talk about it, the impact that I think our world could probably gain from this perspective. So I was on a live Zoom like this probably 4 or 5 years ago. And I had somebody was watching, and they were watching, and they looked in my background, and I can see in your background, and there's a couple books, and I can read those books, and I can see the letters from left to right, and the words make sense, right? And my camera, though, that day was mirrored, and so the words were backwards. And I had someone comment, and it happened to be above the top of my screen, there were the words love and faith. Okay. They just happened to be metal fixtures that were up on a top shelf in the back of my room. And somebody sent me a message, said, hey, Tyler, those are two really, really powerful words, but yeah, they're backwards. And so if you mirror your camera, then people can actually read them. And I was like, oh, snap. Oh, wow. That's real. And as I was helping you and I said, oh, I can move a little bit to the right. And you said, oh, that takes challenge. That lesson years ago told me, and it told me this lesson. And I can't wait. We're going to often go to it. It's already a monologue is people don't see our intentions. Mm-hmm. They see our actions. And while I can look in the mirror and say, man, I look good. I can see the words. They're great. Mm-hmm. And you're sitting on the other side and you're like, no, dude, that's not what the word says. Mm-hmm. I'm going to interject this question. If politicians or leaders understood what I just explained to you, how much different would our world be?
Completely.
All right, we're done.
Here we go. We figured it out. We've solved
Thanks
it.
Thanks for being here, Frank.
Tyler, it's a pleasure. I look forward to the next time. But I mean, it's a great question, and I feel like I'm doing short shrift by a number of really good public servants who really do think about this stuff very deeply. That when I first got into storytelling in politics, and that's so I've been practicing. Undaunted was as a firm I started eight years ago.
A thread to go down for a long time too.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been working on this on the methodology behind this for 10 or 15 years. I'm happy to sort of talk about my approach. But when I first got into it, I think one of the things that I really understood, that I began to understand very quickly, is the extent to which, across all political persuasions, but this is particularly true on the left, but I think it afflicts the right as well. There is a natural tendency for anyone running for office or any activist within a particular political tendency. We just want to talk to ourselves. We've thought through our arguments. We know what appeals to us. We want to talk to ourselves, and that's huge. And then, going beyond politics, looking into other industries, other fields, looking into leadership more broadly, the temptation to talk to yourself and say what you would like to hear and what sounds persuasive to you, that is always there. And that's natural. That's a part of being a human being. You can't get away from that. So, in the sense of you can't stop that urge in yourself, but you have to be aware of it, think about it, and understand that just because you know that behind you are the words love and faith, it doesn't mean that the person across from you knows that that's what you're trying to communicate or how important that is to you. You have to enable them to see that a little bit. And that's a theory of mind problem that I think a lot of politics has.
Well, I mean, again, we could center on politics. I'm going to just say all leadership. Mm-hmm. It's pretty universal. We're in a day and age where trust, whether it's in politics or you name a corporation, trust is pretty much measured at a near all-time low. Now,
Yeah.
we don't know all time, but just, man, it keeps going lower and lower. And I think to hinge on this, it's because people are talking to themselves. They're looking at the mirror saying, man, I look good. Those words are great. And this is something that I told you, writing a book. And as I was that story we just talked about in part of the book, because it was impactful on me.
Mhm.
And this is one of the things that was, as I was getting ready to do a workshop. If you look at the word love, Love, you flip that around, it's Evil.
Mhm.
That's evil.
It is.
And it's wow, I'm acting in love and you're seeing as an evil. Oh, snap. That's not what I intended, but yet as simple as that little anecdote can be, if we're telling ourselves stories like I'm right, I just need to keep double down, and everyone else is like, I'm lost.
Mhm.
You can understand why.
Yeah.
So
One
how
of the
would you—
questions
Oh, go, please.
Sorry, one of the questions that comes up all the time when someone is trying to do something. So I started when I was doing storytelling coaching. I started in politics. I then branched out into other fields because you're right. This is a problem that afflicts leadership
Yeah.
across the board.
Yeah.
One of the sort of the key lessons from it early on was that when every leader is at some point asked, "Why are you doing this?" And it happens to politicians all the time. Why are you doing this? Why are you running for office? It's a kind of weird thing to do, right? Think about running for Congress, right? Like I propose, I think I can represent 625,000 people in a national legislature. It's a strange impulse to have. A lot of good people have it. A lot of people whose motives aren't as good also have it. But it's an odd thing to do, and so people want to know why. Why are you doing this? And it occurred to me after years of practicing in politics that question isn't, they're not really asking you why, what your policies are. And the question, they'll phrase it this way: what are your policies? What will you do
Yeah.
if you're elected?
Yeah.
What is your plan? What are your priorities? I ask all these different ways. And all of them ultimately boil down to one question, which is, why should I trust you? And we don't condition leaders to answer that question. If someone is going in front of a series of investors and they're pitching their business,
Yeah.
there are going to be some technical questions.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what is your business plan? What
Yeah.
is, why do you want to start this business? Isn't really a question about like, how do you propose to make money? You'll get to that. You need to have you need to have done your homework. You need your plan to make sense. But the question of why do you want to start this business isn't about, because I think the numbers can add up and I can make money off of it. It's much more personal than that. It's, why should I trust you with, in the case of an investor, why should I trust you with my money? In the case of a voter, it's, why should I trust you with my franchise? I get to
Yeah. Yeah.
exercise my voice once every 2 years and once every 4 years in some offices. Like, why do you get to speak for me this time? Why should I trust you with that? It's true for a lawyer in front of a jury. It's true for anyone who has to persuade one person of anything else. They need to know why you are doing that, because that trust is at the core of all of this stuff. And we condition, for the best reasons in the world, for understandable reasons. If you're in front of an audience and you are about to persuade them to do a thing, the thing that got you into that position, that got you in front of that jury, that got you in front of that investor panel, that got you in front of that series of voters, the skills that you built are usually highly analytical, and you are prepared to give a really cogent, logical, fact-based answer for why you are proposing to do what you want to do. And in so doing, you are going to bring facts to a feelings fight. You can bring facts to a story fight, because persuasion is about feeling, it's about story, it's about trust. It's not about the facts unto themselves. They need to be right, but they're not what grounds that trust.
Yeah. Man, I what how do you think, if we were to go back and just say in recent history, right? Recent history directs where we're at today, and then we can dip back into ancient history to justify even more why humans are humans. How have we gotten to this place, whether it's through the window in the mirror, like I've shared, or the storytelling, where trust is so low? Well, and let's focus on, business is one, but let's focus on politics. Why do you think trust is so low there?
It's I spend so much time thinking about this. This is my theory. At least let's take America as an example.
Yeah.
We are seeing this happen across the world, right? I just did
Yeah.
a big national narratives project with a firm in Europe, so we're seeing similar stuff. But let's start with
Mhm.
America. And in order to do that, we need to go back. And I'm going to stop briefly and go back to the ancient world, to the very earliest days of humanity, because it's important to understand the role that story plays for humans
Yeah.
and why it's so important to us. So there's every culture in the world has a storytelling tradition. There's never been one without it. And the academic literature on story is very clear that story serves kind of three critical purposes in every society that's ever been practiced in. The first is it conveys critical information in a way that is memorable. So, which essentially a way of saying information that is contained in a story is a lot stickier than information that comes outside of story.
Yeah.
You and I, and I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast, can remember a story that we were told when we were children. We have forgotten the information in an article that we read last week. We've forgotten the information in an article that we read this morning. It just doesn't last. The brain is an attention machine, right? All it does is figure out what to pay attention to. Stuff that comes in a story is much more attractive to the brain. It sticks. It forms and it helps us make sense of our world and what we're supposed to do in it, which leads us to purpose 2, which is it establishes group norms, right? Humans are extremely aware of groups. We are very, very conscious of groups. We know who belongs and who doesn't, and what's our status in this group, and what's that person's status in that group, and what's our relationship to this group.
Sometimes subconsciously.
Almost entirely subconsciously.
Yeah.
We spend an enormous amount of time not thinking consciously, but thinking unconsciously about groups and our relationships to them. And this is a survival mechanism from the very earliest days. You had a group where you died.
Yeah.
So stories, we believe this, and that makes us this group. It tells us what sense we make of the world, why we are who we are, and what we're supposed to do. What are we supposed to do next, right? The questions that afflict all of humanity. Who am I? What am I to do next? A story and the stories that define those group norms. I belong to this tribe, and that is my identity, and it tells me what I'm supposed to do next. Thank God, I no longer have to face every day wondering, God, what am I supposed to do? I know who I am. I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what my relationship to my tribe is. It's a cognitively very comfortable, very safe place to be, as opposed to I don't know who I am. I don't know who my tribe is. I don't know what I'm supposed to do today, and I have no idea who my people are. That's a really painful place to be as a human being. A lot of people get there in various places. That just what I just described to a certain degree sounds like clinical depression, and to a degree it is. So point 2 is it establishes those group norms that establish who we are and who our people are. And then the third thing that story does is it enhances, this is the academic language, and I absolutely love it. It enhances the narrator in the eyes of the audience, which is to say, it just makes your audience like you more if you can tell them a good story, which is another way of saying people expect leaders to be able to tell the tribal story. You don't have to be the best storyteller in the tribe, but if you can't tell your tribe's story, there is something wrong. You are not a trustworthy figure to them, to your tribe. You have to know the story. So all of those are the purposes. Those are the old purposes of story. And nations, in a sort of modern sense, a nation, as we think about it, a place like America, is a pretty recent concept in human history.
Yeah.
And we have stories that we tell ourselves about what America is and what its purpose is. And those stories change over time and they evolve, right? There was a time when America was a place that was, solely for the province of property owning white men. And over time, we have variously through politics and often through violence litigated that amongst ourselves, and we're litigating it today. But I think we are living particularly in in the failure of the story that we have mostly known within these generations, the sort of post-war American compact, which was that, and I'll give you the way that this story works. And by the way, when I say a story is certainly a term of art, and it's something you can use in art.
Sure.
But to me, and in our practice at Altum and Undaunted, a story is a scientific concept, right? There's a series of behaviors and of phenomena, some of which are rooted in behavioral psychology, and some of which are rooted in the very chemistry of our brains, all of which are activated by story. And a good story has to create some of those effects. Those are powerful. Those are replicable. Story is a scientific concept. It's a structural thing for us. So a good story, the American story after World War II was, and I'm going to borrow some language from one of the better political storytellers here, but America is a place where if you work hard and play by the rules, you get ahead, right? Yeah. You can have some confidence that if you work hard and play by the rules, you will do better than your parents' generation, and your children will, and you know what to tell your children. If you tell your children, work hard, play by the rules, you're going to do better than me. Right. And it was this sort of notion that we would have this ever rising kind of quality of life and comfort and time and freedom to be ourselves, to be with the people that we care about. And all we had to do is work hard and play by the rules. And that ran up against, in the last 20 years, the fact that a comfortable life, which is sort of defined as like what in America might be called a middle class life, a comfortable life, one where there's some security and some material comfort, the odd vacation, access to, technology and access to all the, all the stuff that we don't think of as being the province of the super wealthy. It's just stuff that people have if you're living a middle class life. It is now twice as expensive to have that as it was 20 years ago, twice as expensive to get that stuff. And a lot of necessities, including healthcare, has more than doubled in price. So that life has gotten harder and harder to attain. And so the American myth, that American deal, if you work hard and play by the rules, you'll succeed, is being called into question every day. Because the truth is, in America in the last 20 years, and for longer, you could argue, but especially, and I think this is really laid bare with the Great Recession, which is why our politics has been so deranged for the last 2 decades since.
I mean, that's essentially was 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, it was 20 years ago, right? You can work hard, play by the rules, and lose everything, right? People who got wiped out in the Great Recession, they weren't doing anything other than what they were being told to do, right? Like buy property, buy a house, buy 2 houses, right? It's a good investment vehicle. They worked hard, they played by the rules, and they lost everything. And that can happen in America.
And it happened during the Depression in the 30s.
Happened during the Depression. It periodically happens, and so there are a bunch of other aspects to the sort of American deal, the American story, the American myth. But when this core story of a country is being actively called into question by people's lived experiences, we start to lose trust in everything that is based on that myth. And the whole idea was the American government is here to make sure that deal persists. And if that deal doesn't persist, then how on earth could you possibly trust your government or anyone who is serving in it or anyone who wants to be part of it? And I think that's really, if you get right down to it, that is the core of our political distrust, is that our lived experience is so different from our national myth. And no one seems to be able to do anything about it. And precious few politicians even talk about it in those terms.
I don't want to say there's a lot, because that's not fair to you, but there's threads to pull on. And one of the threads in my thought is, using this, as I wrote down in my notes, the 3 elements that I would say elements, but functions of the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Convey critical info, provides group norms, and enhances the narrator to the audience. If I think about those 3 things in the stories of lived experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the most amazing things by me, and you asked me this question, why do you do this? And one thing I didn't get to share is because I get to meet people like you that I wouldn't otherwise meet and have a phenomenal conversation. And by the end of it, hopefully create a relationship where there's value, there's, a friendship, whatever. And I've been able to sit in this chair. And as I shared with you a personal experience that drove me to kind of do this, that other people that I sit across from that maybe grew up in completely different countries, completely different cultures, completely different sexual orientations, completely different faith beliefs. And there's a commonality that, we've had to deal with stuff, and that insecurity that's inside of us is a norm. Again, looking at some of these story elements, the difference is what I've found is the function of how we respond to that sometimes is dramatically different.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just share an example for me, but I want to hear your example. I remember, 07, 08, right? Man, my background, I was a nutritionist for dairy cows. And that time didn't only affect housing, but man, it absolutely destroyed agriculture in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
We saw farmers that were committing suicide. We saw massive bankruptcy. We saw all of those things because commodity prices just were untenable. And one day I lost 25% of my business because our finances weren't in line, but yet it wasn't something I was a part of, but I dealt the brunt.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that instance created a lot of personal growth in me.
Mm-hmm.
I had to face things that I didn't understand. And so kind of as I'm picking that story apart, and the question and wonder is, I can have my personal experiences. You can have your personal experiences to the same catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
But how I respond to it, where I need to, I can either get better or get better, right? To use a story narrative, you're either a hero or you're a victim. How does that align?
What you're asking is a fantastic question, which is, how do you deal? How do you deal what happens when a story fails? How do you deal with the arrival of an unexpected story? And I think that really, I mean, honestly, you could make an argument that the entire practice of psychology is based on helping people practice what happens when your stories fail. One of the things, I
Yeah.
mean, so, I've talked a lot about the storytelling coaching that I do with Undaunted. Ultim is a research firm that is the purpose of which is to uncover the stories that people are telling themselves. And, these are two sides of the same coin. Everyone tells stories. I mean, my argument, and this is very much a man with a hammer sees nail, right? Everything to me is a story. Everything in the
Yeah.
world is a story. It's the
Yeah.
base language of humans, right? Stories. Our identities are constructed off of the stories that we tell ourselves. And what happened in that moment, I think, for you was you were confronted with some version of a story that just failed in front of your eyes. And that can be and you have to learn to tell yourself a different story. The stories that we tell ourselves about, and there's ample academic literature on this stuff. I know it sounds this sounds like terms of art that I'm using here.
Yeah.
This is, rock solid science. The stories that we tell ourselves about our lives are, they define who we are. They define how we act next. And so, you talk about getting better or getting better. That's a wonderful example of this, right? Like you have to learn, you either are looking to reassert the supremacy of the old story. No, what I believed must be true. And if it failed for a moment, then that can lead you down some very dark paths. And someone is to blame for this, and that person has to pay. Or like, I was victimized by someone, because you talked about you're either a hero or a victim. You're missing
Yeah.
the third part of that traumatic triangle, which is the perpetrator.
Yeah. The
So
villain,
you
right?
might start
Yeah.
looking for someone, the villain, the person who hurt you, right? You might start looking for that person. Or, you can sort of, you can understand that in the hero's journey, if you are telling yourself a hero's journey, you're going to get kicked in the teeth. And, it might be by a specific villain. It might be by circumstance. Humans hate it when we're kicked in the teeth by circumstances, because we don't have a specific person
Yeah.
that we can point to
Yeah.
and blame them. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
things happened. You have to learn to tell yourself a new story, and learning to tell yourself a new story, a different kind of story about yourself, about what your expectations for life were, about what happened to you before when I say it's agonizing, it can be physically painful, because these thought patterns that we get into, these grooved behaviors of stories, that help us understand the world. When information comes in, we know it slots into this narrative that I understand, and that's how I can process it. Those become almost physically set. And when someone is confronted with, this is the very essence of cognitive dissonance, when someone is confronted with information or experience that conflicts with a story, that they believe very powerfully, with the values that they hold very powerfully, the physical effect they're experiencing is essentially physical pain. It's not
Yeah.
actually distinguishable from physical pain. It's enormously painful. And so essentially what you're saying is you kind of have to go to the gym, and you have to endure the pain in order to build something a little bit different and a little bit better. And that is so hard to do. And most people avoid it, and that's understandable. You can't blame people
But
for trying to
isn't
get away
that,
from pain.
man,
But
I'm flooded with different stories and thoughts, and just over time that I've read, isn't that the epitome of the human existence?
yeah, I would certainly argue that yeah.
Is that, talk about psychology? I think about Viktor Frankl. Yeah.
Mhm.
That story sucked. But you know what? His story created so much resilience and belief in so many people that no matter what we go through can have tremendous value and purpose. I shared about my brother, that experience with me. I, for years, dealt with that. It's like, oh, the story of how I dealt with the accident of his death and how that implicated me as the one that drove over him and whatever else. Like, I can either be bitter, I can let this bog me down, or I could say, nope, I can look for it isn't the end of me.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
as I sit here and again wanting to dig this out, and kind of this, whether we go back into the last 20 years, right? We
Yeah.
use the Great Recession of 07, 08, give or take. Isn't there a divergent opportunity to look back and say, regardless of race, sex, whatever else, there are people that chose to write a new story, or there's a group that chose to believe a story that verified their pain?
Mhm. Yeah,
Isn't
that's
that okay?
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I think if you went to either to the right or the left political tendency, they would probably say the other one is the person that has retreated into their pain shell, and we are the ones who are looking at, who are sort of looking out into the future and
Yeah.
writing a new story. But I think that you're right in the sense that um, it is a natural. One of the hardest things for me in this practice has been to understand and to give grace to
Mm.
individual people and to groups of people that see a story fail in a very painful way, something that was really sort of integral to their notion of how the world was supposed to work, right? Like, this is
Yeah.
something that I can tell,
Yeah.
particularly, this is something that I can believe, and this is something I can tell my children, and I know it will be true. Because when people stop being able to know what to tell their children about how to build a good life and how the world is going to work, that's when you start seeing some genuinely deranged political behaviors,
Hmm.
which is, I think, again, a lot of what's happened in the last 20 years. You have to give a little bit of grace to that because, again, like, their entire religion's faith, is set up to deal with this question of that we are in life as humans more acted upon than acting. And that, things happen to us, that we do things or things occur for reasons that we can't really understand. And we have to, as you say, the end of that story can be the end of you, or it cannot. And ultimately, we sort of have to figure out how to build lives for ourselves and to build stories and build new expectations for ourselves. And that is the thing to do. But that's Buddhism, right? Like,
Yeah.
these are thousands of years old traditions, all of which are kind of oriented around that same question. So if people can't immediately, or even or even over a period of years, it takes them a long time to understand we need a new story and we need to tell a new story. That's a human response, because you want what the brain likes, what's familiar before it likes what's good for it, famously. We like
Yeah.
things that we know, we like things that we
Yeah.
already understand. It's
Yeah.
hard to build new neural pathways and new behavioral pathways, and it's hard to tell yourself new stories that you can believe. It takes a long time. And I think, you are right that there are political tendencies in this country. I have a very specific notion of which one I think this is, that has
Yeah.
taken a kind of, maliciously nostalgic view of what America was once like. And the idea that, we can rebuild that because everyone who took that away from us is to blame for what happened in the last 20 years.
But
But
isn't that
Mhm.
even in essence almost too simple? Because one of the things is I think about it, it's like, man, we talk about whether it is predominantly, the white founding fathers, the white male founding
Mhm.
fathers. Well, there's a lot of other, racial, country of origin background over the last 250 years that the story would tell you, dude, it isn't absolutely just one subset. It's what was available for one can be available for others. There's stories that back that up.
Mhm.
And, even within, our lifetime, right? And in our different circumstances, like, man, there's a story for everything if we just dig for it. It's almost, and don't get this wrong, it's almost lazy to hear one story and think that's the only story, as opposed
Mhm.
to think, oh, one story is one example for one incident, one person. And you start to build it up, all of a sudden that becomes a trend. But, there's also the opportunity like, hey, I'll share this with you. And then it's conversation is like, so my brother was 3, I was 14, I drove over him in a farming accident.
Mhm.
Okay. He died instantly. Now, one thing that I have been graced, and I've shared this with people, and some people don't believe it, never once have I had an ounce, a moment, an instance of guilt. I don't know. It was an accident. I don't, the only person is a person of faith that is God. That is my belief. That's the story that I understand. However, I know other people, and you and I can understand there's other people in this world who have had tragic accidents like that and are overwhelmed, downtrodden with guilt.
Mhm.
It is possible. So it's two stories. So if I share the story about me and maybe you had an experience of holding guilt, you can be like, man, that just had to be so difficult. And I'm like, no. And
Mhm.
and so it's the same instance, the same catalyst point, but yet two totally different stories. Is one right, one wrong? It's like, well, they're both possible.
Sure. If I were invested, say I were someone in a similar position,
Yeah.
who did, or who was carrying some incident from youth where that was tragic, that I had invested a lot of time and energy into carrying that guilt, like that
Yeah.
story that, like, I am responsible and that, like, that affects my value forever. If
Yeah.
you told me that story and said, I've never felt guilt about this, as you said to me when we were talking at the beginning,
Yeah.
that your brother's life has meaning and this is part of what gives you this path, I might react with outright hostility to that, because what you are proposing is a completely different way of being in the world. The story you're telling yourself about your life and what it means from that moment on is so alien to the way that I would have thought about my
Yeah.
own in those
Yeah.
circumstances, that I might not only not understand what you're saying, but immediately outgroup you as someone that is different. You belong to a different tribe of people, and I don't know if I like you very much because
Yeah.
you're so different from
Yeah.
me.
It's kind of like the camera, the love compared to evil.
Yeah,
It's that rudimentally the same.
yeah. And the person who is talking to you might not know first of all, they wouldn't consciously know it as a narrative or story that they were telling themselves at all, very
Yeah.
likely. But also they might not know that story was sort of, if you want to use the term, like running in the background, forming
Yeah.
part of their identity without their being conscious of it. They might not be aware of it at all unless they had done a fair amount of, a fair amount of psychology, a fair amount of cognitive
Yeah.
behavioral therapy,
Yeah.
or they were a practicing Buddhist, or whatever. All of these sort of different ways that we have of understanding our stories and understanding how to understand our place in the world, and how to again be all right with the fact that things happen to us, and the stories
Yeah.
that we tell ourselves about our
Yeah.
lives are questioned.
Yeah.
And that is ultimately, I think, again, the root of a lot of political dysfunction is not just the inability to understand that someone is coming from a different story and tells themselves a different story about their lives and why things have happened in it, but hostility to that different story. And it seems strange that people might actually be hostile to each other over different stories, but people have fought wars of religion before, which is basically just those are just story wars. Those aren't
Those are
story
still
fights. Those are story
ongoing. Let's be
wars.
honest.
Yeah, then they
Those
happen all the
haven't
time. Yeah,
stopped. They're
right.
still.
Yeah.
Here's the point that strikes me in that. What do you think? And we talked about it. You really the deep level. What's driving the hostility?
Mm. Stories are the foundation of our identity, the things that we
Mhm.
tell ourselves about who we are as individuals, and it goes out from there, right? Like identities have multiple layers, and stories have multiple layers, right? We tell ourselves multiple stories, some of which are what we would call fully intact. So they are, they tick every box that you need to in terms of the behavioral psychology and the cognitive neuroscience of stories. Some of them are partial, where they're kind of loosely formed, and maybe they don't explain everything. Maybe they don't, define you, or they don't drive, or they don't drive or activate your behavior. And I can give you some examples of what some of these things are. But we have all these different identities, and they're all stacked on top of each other. And some of them are more important than others. And so they're the ones that we think about ourselves as people. So, my identity as a father is very important to me personally, and how I think about it a lot. I think about what role I am supposed to play. Who am I and what am I to do now?
Yeah.
I'm a father, and that tells me a
Yeah.
number of things that I'm supposed to do. That's really important to my self-conception, to be a good father, be a good husband.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
important to my self-conception. And our identity is going from there, being a good son, being a good friend to you can see all of these different things. All the way, and that expands. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I live in New Mexico. I'm from the West. Being a Burqueño, as you would say about someone from Albuquerque, that has some meaning to me. Being
Yeah.
from New Mexico,
Yeah.
being from
I'm
the
a
West.
Buckeye. All
Yeah,
right.
but
I get
you're a
it.
Buckeye. That's exactly. And it goes from there, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
And you move on to things like sports fandoms, which for some people are really important, some people are not. But you don't make decisions
Being
on what.
from Ohio,
Yeah,
being a Browns fan,
it's
a
it's tough,
painful
but yeah, you
existence.
don't want to. That's the second time, and I've been on a number of podcasts recently. It's the second time the agony of the story of a Browns fan has come up. It's grim. It's grim.
My wife told me this funny story. She saw it somewhere on TikTok. She goes, "You know how your husband will never cheat on you?
Hmm.
He's a Browns fan."
That is really, really funny. But that again, people love to invite me to parties because I'm the guy who explains why jokes work in narrative science terms. It's a good bar trick as well. But one of the reasons that works is that they are taking what is sports fandom is definitionally a little bit of it's a little bit of a trivial identity, right? Like
Yeah,
as much
totally.
as we can say that we care about it, and I inherited my Texas Longhorns fandom. I get very unreasonable, but it doesn't really define who I am. So, but at the same time, like those fandoms they're playing with the old joke that like who you are in one moment is who you are. Not the old joke, but the old saw. Who you are in one moment is who you are in every moment. Who you are some of the times, who you are all the time. So that joke really does, like, it's playing with different levels of stories. To get back to why people respond to hostility, all of these identities that we build for ourselves tell us who we are and what we are to do next. The absence of that identity is, again, physically painful to us. If we don't have that identity, if we're not sure in those stories, we endure psychic pain that is functionally indistinguishable from physical pain. If someone comes to you with a story that is radically different from yours and undercuts your understanding of yourself, your life, your community's relationship to other communities, that can look and feel indistinguishable from an actual physical attack. It can feel like a threat. Like this person is threatening you in a way that is not really that different from as it than if they had actually pulled out a weapon and were coming
Yeah.
at you.
Yeah.
Our brains are amazing. They're fantastic. I'd spend another 2 hours just talking about the brain and how weird and wonderful it is. But as they have evolved over, over, essentially
Yeah.
millions of years, but hundreds of thousands of years, and millions of years or millions of times, and millions of different types of interactions, and generation after generation, their brains are great and they've evolved in a number of different ways, but they are fundamentally the same ones we walked off the savannas with. And they are very poor at distinguishing between the threat of something that is growling in the bushes behind us and something like a threat to something like someone saying something that is a threat to our
Yeah.
status.
Yeah.
Just to say, threatening our sense of independence or freedom or safety, all of these kind of
Yeah.
higher register thoughts of who we are. If you threaten that, it doesn't register to us as being that different from threatening our actual physical safety, and people react accordingly.
Mhm. I learned that a number of years ago from Dr. Caroline Leaf,
Mhm.
where she explained that what you just said is our brain cannot differentiate, and she used the example: our brain can't differentiate between an actual virus and a bad
Mhm.
thought. Like our brain reacts the
Mhm.
same way to
Yep.
both. It was like unbelievable. Here's the layer that I kind of, as we're asking that, it's like this hostility is this identity. And this identity is rooted in this idea of this is where I have place in that group norm, whatever
Mhm.
that group norm. And you said it as you were eloquently describing these three, where we get disenfranchised, where we, fall into depression is when all of those norms all of a sudden are like completely deconstructed.
Mhm.
And we're saying, well, wait a second, by all the experiences, all the stories I've had, it was this way. And now you're telling me that no, the sky is not blue, it is pink, it is,
Mhm. Yep.
whatever color. And I'm like, I'm struggling with this.
Yeah.
And when you hear it enough, you're just kind of like, you end up cognitive dissonance where you're like, you can't tell up from, I didn't watch it. My kids watched it, whatever. Stranger Things just came out and it was
Mhm.
like the upside down. And all of a sudden, what is down is now up. And it's like, that's what it's so much is going on. And even though it's kind of like you shared this talking about stories, like, hey, the joke is, don't ruin a good story with the facts. Like, don't confuse me
Mhm.
with the facts. Don't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Yeah.
But yet, when in essence, we're relying on all of those facts to intertwine and justify, and we'll pull it's kind of like this. You can't trust stats sometimes because you can have stats tell whatever story you want out of
Mhm.
context. And it's kind of like we've gotten into such a place where we rely so much on a personal fact to justify the entire story, as opposed to say, oh no, the road is actually pretty wide. You can drive in any of these lanes. And all of a sudden now we have a conflict because, you know, people are trying to say, well, that's not the way it is for everyone. We're like,
Mhm.
oh, it could be that way for some, but hyperbole is, I think, the challenge in a lot of stories that we hear today politically,
Mhm.
right? Is that, oh, it's like this everywhere. I don't know if it is or not, but that's not been my experience. Or, yeah, I experienced that, but I created a new narrative because of allowing my identity to flow based upon the personal growth, as you talked about. Buddhist, I can relate a lot of that in Christianity, or go
Mhm.
to other beliefs and religion. It's very similar to that personal growth factor that, man, if we don't have that as a part of our story, man, it's kind of like you have kids. I have 3 kids, and my wife, I mean, they're 19, 17, and 16, joke at times or whatever. It's like, want to bottle them up and keep them the same age. Like, it doesn't work like that. They're going to
Yeah.
grow into adults.
Yep.
That's the
Yep.
process. I think that's the same for, like, we have to allow our stories to do that, and not, to your point, hey, let's hold on to a story from 275 years ago. No, that's not possible. But at the same point, there's elements of that story that still are possible everywhere and anywhere. It's
Sure.
just doesn't have to be in the same package.
Mhm. And I think when you're dealing, so this is really kind of what, again, goes back to the question of what happens when a story fails, or I mean, and fails is a fairly loaded term. Sometimes they expire, they evolve, they change. And I think the expectation
Yeah.
that a story is going to remain consistent for your entire life, I think, would be what, I mean, would is rigid, and I think is likely to lead to disappointment. Stories do change, and one of the things my father once said to me that I think about a lot is anger is a reaction to disappointed expectations.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
there's really something in that like
Mhm.
when we tell ourselves stories about what has happened, we are also projecting the future out of it.
Yeah.
That if we understand what's happened, we can look forward into the future and we can see what's going to happen. And then the things that we expected to happen don't
Yeah.
happen. And
Yeah.
then we
Yeah.
we may be angry because our expectations were disappointed. But we could also, as you say, choose a different narrative and think about what we expected to happen. Think about the story that was important to us, that had value to us, and think about what we want to preserve from that. So there is a version of the story of this country in which a group of property-owning white men gathered together to build a country that concentrated power significantly in the hands of property-owning white men, and was designed specifically. If you look at the design, there's a terrific book out recently on this by Osita Nwanevu, to the effect that, and it's so good can't recall its name now. Apologies to him. It is a fantastic book, but his basic theory is that actually what we think about as dysfunction in democracy is in fact something that we inherited from the very foundation of this country. That it's actually not designed to work all that well. That it is in fact designed to concentrate power. That's one argument about that is one story you can tell about this country, that it has really always kind of been about the concentration of power in the hands of a few. You could also look at that same instance and say that same, group of guys and the people who immediately followed them could have locked down power absolutely and forever in a way that was not for themselves, in a way that mirrored the experience of the aristocracy in England, as much as they were willing to model it themselves, having just revolted against it. They could have done that. And instead they chose to redistribute power as best they could. And then
Yeah.
when that model failed, this is one of the things we always forget about America, is the first time we tried to do America, it failed through the Articles of Confederation. It went so badly that we had to completely scrap it and start again. Very important to remember that the first version of this country was a failure and had to be tried again. They came together and wrote a constitution, and that we have since evolved that over time as a way of expanding on that promise that everyone has a share in this country, and
Yeah.
everyone has a voice, and
Yeah.
everyone has an opportunity to govern this country. The
Yeah.
thing is, both versions of that story have truth in them.
Yeah.
And it's important to recognize that the truth of the first one, the somewhat more pessimistic story about this country, because you can't really understand why
Yeah.
our institutions are creaking
Yeah.
so badly unless you understand that to a certain degree they were kind of designed to
Well,
resist
and
what
then
people
they,
wanted.
to your point
Yeah.
very much is like, hey, that isn't working. We have to adjust and change
Yeah.
because that's what we just came from. It can't be that way. And I think here, and I learned this earlier today as I was in a training, a leadership training, is where we get in trouble is we're unwilling to grow and learn and alter that identity as necessary.
Exactly. We're not willing to tell ourselves a new story. And so what we need to do is to think about what from the old story was valuable to us that we can carry with us into the new story, so the future can be born from an ancient seed. Because that story about the distribution of power and the country where everyone has a play, where everyone is able to make a country, everyone has a share, right? Everyone has an equal share of
Yeah.
this country and an equal share of how we govern ourselves as a community. That is, those are two contradictory stories: the power concentration story and the power sharing story. Both of them are technically true. Again, you don't get a realistic view of this country if you don't understand the power concentration story. But also, if you just accept that that's it, that that's all America's ever been, is one long concentration of power in the hands of wealth and privilege, it kind of flies in the face of a lot of American history. That periodically we periodically just decide, actually, no, this is a community
Yeah.
exercise. That
Yeah.
this is a place that belongs to everyone, and
The
when we will
upward
do.
mobility has been shown as a story for so many.
Right. It does happen. And occasionally we fight and kill each other for the rights of other people to share in that story. And when I say, I'm thinking particularly about the American Civil War, but you could make an argument that there was a second Civil War between capital and labor. We periodically fight each other over this stuff. And there's always someone who's willing to fight for the concentration of power, either because they're paid to or because it's in their interest. But there's always someone who is willing to fight for the distribution of power and for the equity and
Yeah.
for the idea that everyone can make of themselves what they want to in this country, right?
Yeah.
Those two stories work. And so if you're thinking about, well, how do we build a new expectation and a new political compact, the thing that we need to think about is, what are we trying to take from the old compact, the old political story that had value, and update it to a new political story. And as you say, that failure, that unwillingness to adapt stories, and that need to hold on to it and to move away from it. You don't have to throw a story out completely, but we take what's helpful, what's useful from one, and move on from there. And that's perfectly fine. That doesn't mean we're wrong. It just means we're picking something that we can use to build something better.
Is it plausible, as we just talked about, this power struggle, right?
Mhm.
And this idea of power, of the people that are telling a story today of, how do I want to frame this essentially, I'm going to call it for what it is. Just bear with me, Reddit.
Sure.
Is it plausible? And it might get a hair on your back of your neck. Fine, just, dude, we're having a good conversation. Is it possible that the leaders in the Democratic Party are telling this story of social, social? I don't want to use social, but I get where I'm getting at. Is like, we need to redistribute the opportunity for wealth or whatever. Are actually doing so at their benefit to control that power, as opposed to the storytellers on the Republican side is like, hey, we're not telling that story. We've seen the opportunity to kind of make of it what it is. We don't need to upset that because that's been there. And actually, where we've gone sideways is we've tried to, take out of the community's power to lift people up, instead of saying, hey, we're just going to give it to you and then you'll be fine. But we're the ones determining who's giving what.
Mhm.
Do you understand that?
I understand the argument that you're making, and I think where I think it doesn't work as a story,
Yeah.
and it's certainly it is technically plausible. It assumes a level of conspiracy on the part, and the version that you just told, on the part of Democratic Party leadership, because the beginning of the story that you said was they're doing it just for control.
Yeah.
Mostly in my experience in politics, and I, this
Yeah.
this may be different from years in life, but mostly what I've observed, and now we're going back to lived experience, and and my
Totally. It's
assertion
great.
of one fact is that where there is failure, and there's certainly significant failure on the part of the leadership of the Democratic Party over the last 20 years and more. I am, many
And
respects,
I'm
a
going to
fierce
stop you
critic of
right
my own.
here, as we're
Yeah.
saying, there's just as much, in my belief, failure on the Republican, like the whole mess of it. But where we sit today, as we see
Mhm.
this power struggle, is
Yeah.
kind of what I laid out. And that's what's like,
But your assumption, my experience has been there is very rarely conspiracy at the head, particularly when you're talking about a political tendency that's big as the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. It's very rarely conspiracy. Humans love to believe in conspiracy because it
Yeah.
implies that there's intentionality, right? We're getting back to this, like,
You get the
there has to be a
villain. Yeah.
perpetrator. There has to be someone whose plan this is. No, it's not. It's just that humans aren't very good at stuff a lot of the time. All right, this is, Julius there's a story about the Pope, about Pope Julius III, and he's he's toward the end of his of his time as Pope, and he's being criticized and rubbished from all sides. He's a bad pope. He's not doing a very good job, which may actually have been true, but we'll leave that to one side. And there's a story about he's traveling through the countryside, and this novice, this young priest comes up to him, and really admires him, and he says, he said, I admire so much what you're doing. It's so bad that you're being so badly treated, and I just wish more people understood what you're trying to do and how valuable what you're trying to do is. And the Pope looks at him and he says, do you know, my son, with how little understanding the world is ruled? And and that story is sometimes attributed to other people, but I think about that all the time, because do you know how with how little understanding the world is ruled? It is a really uncomfortable truth to accept that the people who are in charge are fundamentally not that different from the rest of us,
Yeah.
right? They're not. This was a hard lesson for me when I started. I was a very starry-eyed, kid getting into politics. And I didn't think they were superheroes, but I thought they surely, they must be possessed of some remarkable wisdom. And many were. I mean, I've met some public servants that were really wonderful, remarkable people. But for the most part, they're just people like everyone else. They were just kind of, they were doing the best they could in difficult circumstances.
Take that two ways. Is I've laughed. It's like, hey, everyone gets up to pee at 3 a.m. Like, come on, dude. Like, it all happens to us. And as opposed to, and it's kind of this essence, don't make your, don't get too close to your heroes, because you realize that they're human. And it to that point, and it's a little bit of, I think, to your concept, is like, hey, Tyler, you're giving them too much credit if you think they can masterfully create this. But man, we could create a story with all these facts that looks like that's the case.
Mhm.
But it's kind of comes back to where I interject. It's like, man, this is the thing that I hold on to.
Mhm.
If, as you and I are telling stories and sharing experiences, right? Your Longhorn fandom, my Buckeyes took care of that business. Just leave that there for fun, smile, chuckle.
I should never have brought that up. That was a
That's
mistake.
okay. That's okay. I mean, I told you I was a Browns fan. Like, come on, have some grace on me, right? Okay. But even as we joke about that, I can relate to you. If we don't agree on anything else, like, hey, yeah, my team had the better of you one game. Guess what? I watched years and years ago when your team had the better of me. Doesn't make me think any less of Frank. And I think it comes back to that. It's like, if we can get into that element of being able to, again, sit in a room and saying, hey, Frank, I appreciate that you're a father, you're a football fan, that you love the Southwest, that all of, great, that's awesome. Now, there's a whole lot of other facts maybe you and I don't agree on, but that's okay because here's all the things we do. If we can get to that point and say, all right, now what story do we create out of our shared experiences that, hey, still benefit us each moving forward and collectively, as opposed to if all of a sudden I walk in this room and you're like, oh, you're a Buckeye fan and I'm gone.
Mhm.
That doesn't help anyone because then all the rest of the story is predicated on all one fact. And it's even like, I'm going to go back to, if we sit here, I'm not going to name names and that's not fair. If we say there's a grand conspiracy theorist that wanted to, oh, we're going to give power to more, but I seem to, incrementally do better than everyone else, but I'm in charge of this party to give everyone to everyone else. It doesn't seem right. If we hold on to that and then make decisions, we're creating more antagonism to our identity as opposed to saying, hey, that's a one-off. Great. How do we get back to, how do we be more, equitable, kind of, as you said, from understanding the first instance of the United States to the second, there had to be a recorrection.
Mhm.
Or had to be a correction, a redirection, a correction. Recorrection's not a word. I get it. So,
But I like the concept of a recorrection. It's nice. So you correct and then you recorrect. But that really has been, I mean, that really has been the story of America. We correct and then we recorrect and then we recorrect again. And we, that exercise of, I hadn't really thought about this, but the exercise of nation building as a sort of collaborative storytelling exercise is really important. Most identities are just exercises in collaborative storytelling.
Yeah.
Where I think we have arrived with the problem, where we are in
Let
a
me ask you,
spot
as
where
you're
the
saying that,
collaborative,
what's the problem?
with collaborative storytelling or with
No. Where
sorry.
we've arrived to the problem is where you kind of said, I just
yeah,
was hoping as you're saying that, what's the problem?
So the problem that we've arrived in my view,
Yeah.
is that there are facts on the ground. There are facts of people's lived experience. And I am the person who says, do not bring facts to a story fight. Do not bring facts to a feelings fight. And again, I come out of the Democratic Party. We love to bring facts to a story fight. Nothing pleases us more than to bring facts to a story fight. We'll bring you. We've got our 10-point policy manifesto. It's horrible, right? Just can't, renders us unable to communicate, sometimes for years at a time. So we love to bring facts to a story fight. Yeah, exactly. But there are, there are things that are happening now. There are lived experiences. There are things that we can all see. And this is like at the very beginning of this, you talked about that people don't judge you by your intentions; they judge you by your actions. There are things that we have all experienced, and things that we can all see, and they all see that are being done now that we can't avoid. And at some level, there are things that are so clearly what they are. They are inequity, unfairness, cruelty that are happening directly in front of us that may contradict some of our stories. And we have to be honest with ourselves before we can extend each other the grace to do collaborative storytelling. We have to be honest with ourselves. And I've in some of the studies that we've done recently, we're seeing people who are having we'll name a few names here, people who believe very strongly in the Trump project, who are looking at particularly what ICE is doing now, and they're seeing something that just conflicts with the story they were telling themselves, and they're having to process that. That's really hard for them.
Yeah.
Because this wasn't the story they told themselves. And that can be really hard. And I'm not asking anyone to subscribe to my belief on this, but they're having to change. They're having to accept that their story has changed a little bit. And I think that's what we all owe.
But I want to hinge on that because the difficulty is the facts don't tell the truth, but man, you can't disavow the facts. Right. If we look and we want to hinge on this one thing, if we look at the ICE deportations or whatever else, we look at it as a factual account, what's going on now is no higher than what it's been for 20 years. It maybe is different. It's slanted a different way. Okay. I can't it is what it is. I don't think it is. It's told in such a story that it's a violation as opposed to, well, is it or is it not? Right. I'm not with them. It's you gotta be careful sometimes what you use as facts, because like, I don't even know, right? And
Well, sure,
it's
but
fair on both ways.
we could talk, yeah, and we can say that, but that's another good example of, again, the way that and storytellers forever have been arranging facts to tell their own story, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
that is
yeah.
like that's political communication. There's nothing inherently evil about that. And you could make the argument the number of, if you're looking at immigration policy, the number of deportations is not significantly altered, although it has increased a bit, but it's not out of line in the past. But the methodology by which those deportations have been achieved is a substantial change from the way it has historically been done, and
Well, but here
that's been
lies in the
progressing over
question
the
is,
last 10 years. But that's what I think certainly a lot of the people that we've been talking to are
yeah,
struggling with, not the concept behind, and we can
yeah, yeah. No, it's good. It's good.
debate the wisdom of the policy approach in terms of the idea of deportation versus not.
Yeah,
You have one view, I have another, but the
yeah,
principal view, but what they're objecting to is the execution of it and what that
yeah,
says about the mindset behind the execution
yeah,
that conflicts with
yeah.
their values.
Well,
Who
but
you know,
I think what's interesting is, and there's a note here, and we're getting to it. Let's go back 20 years, right? We're using that as a hinge point for
sure,
whatever reason, right, wrong, or different. Man, what you and I saw, I'm 46. I'm guessing, Frank,
45.
you're
So yeah, we're
okay,
right in
same
there.
age.
Yeah.
What we saw in our mid 20s, as far as everyday video of operations, are way different today than what you and I experienced 20 years ago. And so that informs our story, the provides group norms, right? Going back to that,
Mhm.
and now all of a sudden see something that I've never seen before. Oh my goodness, this is wrong. It's like, dude, we've done the same thing for 20 years. I don't know. It's right. It's all of a sudden, I have a farm, right? 10
Mhm.
acres. I got a cow. He's
Mhm.
somewhere out here. And if I were to take a video of what I do today, and you're like, Tyler, why do you do it that way? And I'm like, I've done it this way for 20 years. This
Sure.
is just how you do it. Oh my
Mhm.
goodness, you can't do it that way. It's like, well, that's the way to do it. Like, there is
Mhm.
no better other way. It's not pretty, but that's what it is. All of a sudden, now you're seeing it and creating this. It's kind of like um, this this utopic mentality. It's kind of like, if you don't have a frame, you think the best. It comes back to the same as we're talking about heroes. Is like, all of a sudden you realize your person's like, yeah, but they wake up with perfect hair, and they don't look like shit in the
Mhm.
morning. Like, their beard isn't all sprout. Like, no, they like. It's like, we could joke and say like, oh, my wife, she's beautiful, and then I wake up next to her in the morning and I'm like, oh, I look just as bad. Like, it is. I mean, not on her, but it's just, that's the reality. And I think what I wonder is the violation sometimes of our stories is more of what we've made up. And that happens just
Mhm.
as much for
Mhm.
me as it is for you and anyone
That's fair.
else.
Yeah.
And that's where it's kind of like, oh, now we're seeing behind the curtain, and we're realizing, dude, there's a monkey back there running the show. It's not this grand wizard. And it comes back to this cognitive and dissonance. And it's just kind of like, as I'm talking in a circle, I think that's the great reckoning.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that sort of understanding that the system, for a long time, for generations of Americans, more or less had this notion that that we understood what government was for, that it was there to do a specific thing, and that maybe if the right party were in power. And I think this is I think a useful spot.
Yeah.
If the right party were in power, the government would do its job better.
Yeah.
And if the other, and if the,
Yeah.
and if the wrong party were in power, it wouldn't do its job as well.
Yeah.
And what we have seen over time is, in the last 20, 25 years, has been, you can make the argument, if you're Republican, you make the argument the Republican administrations
Yeah.
have been better. If you're Democrat, you make the argument the Democratic administrations have been better. But it's increasingly difficult to make the argument that either party has done a very good job of what it
Fair.
is there for. And
Yeah.
this is one of the things I will say, because we've been sort of kind of talking around this in a way that I think is understandable and a little bit respectful. So again, I'm not going to ask you or anyone who's listening to this to subscribe to the narrative that I'm about to say. I'm just going to articulate this.
Yeah. Go for it.
You could look at the way that immigration is being enforced right now
Yeah.
through, and again, this is about mechanics.
Yeah.
Mechanics of ICE, masked men, armed men.
Yeah.
Pursuing their mission the way that they
Yeah.
are. And you can, as the number of people that we've talked to recently, see this as being an aberration. And this is, to your point, it's new, it's different. It's not the way that it's been done before. And that it looks different. And you could make the argument that is substantively different, and you could say it's cruel, you could say it's a number of different things, and you might be right. And at the same time, and from that perspective, you're probably coming from, you might be one of the Republicans we've talked to recently. You could also be a Democrat who's believed this the whole time. But the point that you made is not wrong, that in fact, both parties have pursued an immigration strategy that fundamentally has been rooted in repelling migration, in deportation, in stiffening the border. And we can argue about whether or not that's the right approach.
Yeah.
But for a lot of Democrats, it is really hard to admit that under both Biden and Obama, that deportation was an order of the day, and that a lot of the powers that Trump used, especially in his first term, were ones that he inherited straight from Obama and was able to use.
I mean, I don't know this, but you could assume he didn't change much.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, and particularly in the first term, the new term, I think you can make an argument. It's not a difference. It's a difference that is so different. It's not a difference of degree. It's a difference of kind. But one of the things that I'm sort of always looking for when I'm sort of interested in thinking about for people who belong to my larger political tribe on the left, is can you look back at our complicity in the last 15, whatever outrage, whatever we're upset about in the current state of affairs.
Yeah.
I guarantee you that some element of the Democratic Party is at least partially responsible for it. Some part of the Democratic administration is partly responsible for it. Maybe substantially responsible for it. If you're a Republican, you might say they're completely responsible for it.
You have to say the same thing. If you don't, that's where I have a problem. Meaning we both, the opportunity is, as you and I are sitting here, it's like, man, we're all in this. Mm-hmm. We have to own it. We can't pick and part and say, well, that's not me. It's like, no, there's, if Frank did it, I'm going to use this analogy. If we say that the game on, I can't remember the date, September 1st, because I don't remember exactly, but the first game of the year between Texas and Ohio State was the worst college football game ever played. It was just atrocious. Man, the Buckeyes have never played in bad games. Like, it's only Texas have ever played bad games. Like, hate to tell you, buddy, there were two teams that played that night, right? Yeah. There were two quarterbacks that, and it's kind of like this whole political, like, hey, you can't have it all one way. Both people are sitting at the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And if your story insists upon casting the other here's the thing. If your story insists upon casting the other political tendency as the perpetrator and villain constantly, then you are absenting yourself from the act of collaborative storytelling by which we collectively make a country. That doesn't mean you have to doesn't mean you'd have to turn away from what you see in front of your own eyes. And it doesn't mean that what you're seeing isn't true and what you're feeling about your reaction to it isn't true. But there is
that is the entire linchpin of distrust.
Mm.
If all of a sudden, again, we're sitting here and saying, if I'm unwilling to accept, we haven't always got it right. No, we've always done it right. And I know that, they're kind of screwed it up. We already have the track record. But I'm sitting here like, Frank, I did it right every single time. I never was sideways. I don't trust you. Mm-hmm. But if I walk out and say, I screwed it up a lot of times, but I'm learning and I'm getting better, I'm with you. Let's go. All right, let's figure that out. That to me is, where we're at in this great reckoning. Who's going to be the first one in whichever party? I will sit here from my side. Yeah, I lean more towards Republican, but I'm not sitting saying they're all right. It is what I'm just generally more conservative, whatever. It's not something for me. It's a personal identity. I've tried to shirk more of that within my family, but I also look at it and say, hey, no one's perfect. Both sides. Like, how do we move this thing together and say, instead of polarizing and getting deeper and deeper, like just as much to the right, just as much left, you're not helping anyone. And what's interesting is that great reckoning where we're starting to see all of that distrust erode and the conspiracies on both sides. It's happened on both ways where all of a sudden people are like, dude, we got to tell a better story. Let's start telling the stories of actual people as opposed to stories to drive a certain narrative.
Yeah, I think there's truth in that. And I think one of the difficult things that is going to come up certainly for the Republican Party, the Democratic Party has been going through its own 10 years in the wilderness, longer, you could argue.
But the Republican Party was there too.
Oh yeah, and I think the Republican Party is coming on. I will say this: like America has spent 10 years within one particular political subnarrative, which is make America great again. The thing is, it's funny, Democrats have a very hard time talking to me about this sometimes because one of the things that we have to accept is whatever else it may mean in its applications as a strictly political narrative. The story, we used to be great, we're not great anymore, I will make us win again, which is the longer version of Make America Great. And it's short, it's 16
Yeah.
syllables long, is the most effective political narrative of the last generation in American politics. We've lived inside it for 10 years, right? Like how
Yeah.
you feel about it, whether you like it, whether you
Yeah.
don't, how you react to it,
Yeah.
it has completely set the stage for this. And I think we are, and political analysts can disagree with me on that, but I think we are seeing the crumbling of that political tendency based on how the second Trump term, now into 12, 13, 14 years of this being the dominant story. When MAGA as a political tendency, as the dominant story of American politics, but especially as the sort of lodestone story of the Republican Party crumbles, who is going to hold on to it, and who is going to accept, okay, that we did that, and it didn't get us where we wanted to be as a country. And from the Democratic Party, we also have to look at our own stories and ask ourselves the same questions. And the people who are willing to do that and willing to look at this and say, this led us to some places that we don't ever want to go again, that we can't go again. Those are the people that I think are going to be able to build something together. And I don't know what portion of each party that's going to be.
I
My
mean,
hope
what I
for
take from
America,
both of that is the opportunity to recorrect or, reorient, to
Mhm.
correct our course on both sides is great. Just as much as one side went one way, the pendulum swung the other way. It's like, hey, swinging it back harder the other way is not going to fix it. We've tried that, didn't work. And it's like, all right, how do we move this thing towards, as you were saying that in one of the things that lived experience
Mhm.
and you know, my going back to July of last year, around 4th of July, and live in a part of the world where it was like, man, do I fly an American flag or not?
Mhm.
And it was really kind of this, if I go out with an American flag, I'm gonna get vilified just for
Mhm.
flying an American flag, because that has become a moniker of a story, which I think is just kind of this further degradation. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. What are we missing here?
Mhm.
Where we're starting to use our own nationality as the identification of something that we don't agree with, this identity, as opposed to, no, we need to collectively own that, even though it's kind of like a family. Like, our dysfunction is our actual function, right?
Mhm.
And it's just embracing that, as opposed to, no, I'm going to leave my family and think it's better somewhere else. And you get across the street and the other side is like, well, they just have problems. They're just dressed in different clothes, but same problems. Again, this idea of like, hey, we can't completely do away with one, because that void in a vacuum is going to cause just as much problem. We got to find a way to come together.
Mhm.
I don't know
Yeah,
if it
and I
makes
think
sense.
the American flag is an interesting example because what you can fly it, and it can end this, and what it can mean to you, and the story about America that it can symbolize is the one about, we're all in this together, that we all have
Yeah.
a share, that we all have this,
Yeah.
we're not, the intention here is not to concentrate
Yeah.
power in the hands of a very small number of people who are going to hang on to it and use it for their own enrichment. It can also, unfortunately, it can also kind of mean the opposite. And so the question, but it doesn't have to. The
Yeah.
question is, what does it mean to you when you fly it?
Yeah.
And that really is kind of, and I think that's the essential question of every political story. What is your party
Yeah.
identification? What is your political story? What does the story of your country mean to you? What do you want to preserve from what is coming? What do you want to take forward?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Frank, where can people learn more about you, about Undaunted Ventures, about Altum Insights? Where can people learn more there?
So you can find Altum's research at altum-insight.com. We just put up a report about rural voters in Nebraska that we spoke to about a number of things, but what they were really worried about was AI, which was fascinating. You can find Undaunted Ventures at theundaunted.co. That's my storytelling for leadership company, and you can read my stuff. You can find me on Blue Sky. I'm Frank A. Spring at Blue Sky. That's a good place to spot me. I don't post often, but I do post occasionally, and
Right.
it's like, as with most social media, a lot of it is nonsense. Fair amount of it's Texas Longhorns nonsense, but occasionally I also try and say something trenchant as well.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for everyone watching on YouTube. If you could hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to get notified whenever we drop new content, I'd appreciate that. As well, if you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, if you can rate and review this episode, it will help more people find impactful leaders like Frank. Until next time, choose to lead with impact.